So yeah, I am the chief executive. We're a small company. We have about 120 people who work there. And I didn't necessarily support the lean program. I was the lean program. I lived and breathed the lean program. I was the point of contact for our consultant. And I still am. If I were to say the number one thing that I do at our company, it's enforce the principles of lean and make sure that they work. Jerry talked a little bit about unions, and the one connection between unions and lean is without lean manufacturing, we would not be able to afford union labor. Union labor is expensive. However, it's expensive because the people who work there earn a living wage and they have great benefits. And they're happy employees, and happy employees make productive employees. And productive and happy employees who want to do well for the company follow the principles of lean manufacturing. So I was introduced to your organization, I guess I spoke here about 5 or 6 years ago. Our consultant who was affiliated with NJMEP, familiar with NJMEP? So Dave Hollinger, who's a member of this group, I believe.
Yes.
And so he invited me to come and speak about our experience with lean, and this was kind of in between programs. We went through a lean transformation between 2004 and 2006. And I spoke here for a while, and then we bought a bag factory, which was the complete opposite of lean. And used Dave's help and all of our experience, and at the end of that process, we took a factory which was in 60,000 square feet and had about 80 workers and fit them in an 8,000 square foot space in our facility with 60 workers, and doubled their production in our first year. Wow. Taking them over. So that's kind of the experience that we had with lean. So I'll tell you a little bit about our company. We manufacture bags, such as backpacks, handbags, tote bags. We do a lot of military business. Picatinny Arsenal is one of our biggest clients, coincidentally. We manufacture ammunition pouches for the Army. We manufacture garment bags for the Air Force. We also have a very big hat business, and the reason we're called Unionwear is unions are a very big part of our clientele. We're the only union shop in the country that produces baseball hats and one of 4 that produces bags. So when you think of unions, they buy baseball hats. Just imagine every Teamster that steps out of a truck wearing Teamster local whatever hat, that's us. We make that. That's still a big part of our hat business. Now, we're in Newark and we have union labor, and that means that for all of our product categories, we're probably the most expensive contractor in the world. We're expensive real estate, expensive labor, and a lot of people just ask me, how do you compete with China? Well, we can't compete with China on wages. We can't compete with China on labor. So we kind of changed the game. And what we do is we compete on creating value. That's kind of our focus, and that's one of the focuses of lean. There's a lot of people have misconceptions about creating value, and I just want to read a few things here about clearing up some of these misconceptions, if you don't mind. So, manufacturers can't create value by building up work in process because parts have no value until clients are willing to pay for them. Manufacturers can't create value by cutting labor costs. You can cut your unit cost on a product by using lean tools, but unless you redeploy that labor into creating more value, you're not creating value. Manufacturers can't create value by focusing on profits. Using productivity as a tool to increase profits is just the other side of the labor cost equation, and a manufacturer in New Jersey cannot compete on labor. Manufacturers only create value when your finished product sells for more than it costs you. Otherwise, you're not creating value, you're just moving it around. And I say this because a lot of people think creating value is just making work, and we're making product. But you're better off keeping people home. Manufacturers can't create value by getting workers to work faster. Because if they're working fast but not adding value to a product, they're actually destroying value. So we've survived through a single-minded focus on creating value. And this lean transformation that we went through 9 years ago now was just the beginning. Staying lean is a constant, never-ending struggle against human nature that you consultants like to call continuous improvement. Continuous improvement means that our lean team, and we have a team of supervisors that review all of our lean procedures, they try every day to create more value with the same people. When we measure productivity, we only measure finished product. And after 9 years of continuous improvement, across the board, we have tripled our productivity. At the same time, the cost of imported textile products has more than doubled. So our products went from being 5 and often 10 times higher in price than an imported product to being in the ballpark. And we are now, on average, for bags, maybe 20 to 25% more expensive, which is in the range of a premium that people are willing to pay for made in USA products. And that's part of the reason we've been able to grow from 40 employees in 2004 to about 130 right now. I started Unionwear in '92 when I saw a niche that was not being served, which was selling to markets that value country of origin, like made in USA, enough to pay a significant premium for those products. The Department of Defense was probably the biggest example of that. They're the only purchaser in the country that actually has a law that their products have to be manufactured in the USA from materials that are grown or processed in the USA. There are other departments that have laws that more than half of the product needs to be made in USA. There are a lot of markets such as political campaigns that will only buy products made in USA. But we were able to survive on that market I started business in '92. From '94 until about 2004, we were competitive with the rest of the country. And we were just really focusing on the made in USA and union made market. And then in 2004, New Jersey passed a law to raise its minimum wage. And we weren't ahead of the rest of the country. We were not paying people minimum wage, but we weren't paying people right off the street with no experience $8 or $9 an hour either. And that's kind of where we would have to be pretty quickly. So we were looking for a way to stay competitive with places like Georgia. And in 2004, we calculated that an entry-level worker in a non-union shop in Georgia could make about $5 an hour, whereas an entry-level worker in a union shop in New Jersey was being paid about $11 an hour with the benefits. Day one, no experience. It's the cheapest we could legally pay them. It was very difficult, and we were not able to compete nationally. We were looking for kind of a magic bullet to solve this problem, and that's when I stumbled upon one of NJNEP's Lean 101 simulations. And has anybody here ever gone through one of those? Next question, has anybody here worked with lean manufacturing before? Raise your hand, just want to see where we're at with it. So the Lean 101 simulation is a simulated factory. It's a kind of an 8-hour program run by NJNEP, and you make clocks. And at the beginning, you have a lot of professional senior people who think they know everything, myself included, sit down and they work into teams, and everyone's very competitive, and they try to make the most amount of clocks in the way that they know. And your lean principles are introduced throughout the day. And by the end of the day, a group of you guys over here, in 1 hour, you might have made 15 clocks at 9 o'clock. And then by 3 o'clock, you're making 300 clocks using all these principles. So it's a great program. I highly recommend it to anybody. And when I came back from that program, I looked around my factory, and all of a sudden, I was angry. I couldn't believe how dumb everybody was. How did they not see all this stuff that I hadn't noticed for the last 12 years? So, all I could see when I came back was non-value added work. That's all I could see. That's what people spending 15 minutes looking for a pair of scissors. People waiting for their boss to get off the phone. People sitting there while their machine was down. People desperately looking for thread. People building work in process inventory. People measuring manually every single garment to make sure they did the right job. They were doing non-value work. They were working very hard, very diligently, but they weren't adding value to the product. Now, those are all things that I can't put on an invoice to a client. So if I get rid of it, that's bottom line profit right there. So we figured out pretty quickly how to calculate added value time, non-value added and adding value time to see where we stood. And we did that just by doing time studies of how people would work at 100% efficiency, and then comparing that to how much time they were actually working. And across the board, we had 2 different departments at the time. People were adding value to the product about 20% of the time. The others, so they were about 2 hours of time, so 25%. And the other 6 hours, they were working just as hard, they just weren't adding value. So while our floor supervisors like to focus on problems like people sneaking a call on their cell phone or going to the bathroom, and those types of situations, they add up to maybe 10 minutes of time. And here we are not adding value for 6 hours. And that's what the supervisor's focus was. We had consultants in there, and their focus would be we measure our labor in minutes. So a tennis shirt might take 23 minutes of labor to produce when it's added. And they could introduce all these attachments and methods and everything, and they could get that down to 20 minutes at best. I mean, that would be a home run. And what they're not realizing is for the other 40 minutes, people are doing things that are not sewing, and they're not even measuring that. So we never really touched on that non-value added work. We pretty quickly hired Dave Hollinger through NJMEP to come in. He had absolutely no garment industry experience. And at our first meeting with him, I brought our plant manager who'd been in the textile industry for about 40 years. And we sat together, and Dave said he had no garment industry experience. And our plant manager, Mike, said, I don't see how you can help us to sew faster. And Dave said, I have no intention of helping you sew faster. My experience is eliminating all the work that you do when you're not sewing. It's always the same. The 8 waste, it's always the same, whether you're in food processing or you're manufacturing auto parts. So we gave him a small job to kind of prove himself before we invested a lot of money in it, and that was to improve our setup time in embroidery. Our embroidery manager was estimating that we were spending about 20 minutes between orders in taking the thread down, putting new thread in the embroidery machine, and embroidering these logos. And Dave sat there on the first day, he said, it's actually taking you more like 3 hours between orders. 20 minutes was what it said on the spreadsheet when you bought the machine. It's 3 hours. So we took a look at why it was taking 3 hours. And the first problem was our embroidery manager is from China. Her English is pretty good. Her floor people were mostly from Ecuador. Some of them spoke English pretty well. And she would take our papers of orders, and she would write on there gray, forest green, navy blue, what kind of thread they would have to go and look for. And give it to the workers. The workers would walk out to the shelves, and they'd see these closed boxes that said cement and canary and pewter and soup. And they would have no idea what was gray and what was green. They'd have to open every box. And then when they found a gray, it was never the right one. So they'd get in the habit of bringing back 6 grays at a time and saying, which one is it? And the manager would look at it, and she'd say, if we're lucky, she would say it's one of these. And then they would go back, and the boxes were boxed in boxes of 12, but the machines embroidered 20 at a time. So they'd have to find another box, and then they would bring it over to the machine, and then they would move on to the next color. It's usually 3 or 4 colors in the design. So 3 hours later, we're ready to start the embroidery again. So that was an example of non-value added work there. So the first thing we did was we took all of our probably 1,500 colors of embroidery thread, and we took them out of the boxes. We got rid of the names. We used color numbers. We put them in clear Ziploc bags, and then we just created color-coded bins, kind of like a rainbow, and we put them in there. And now when she gives a worker an order, they walk right, they could pick out 3 colors in 10 or 15 minutes and bring them right over to the machine and put them right on the machine. So that was the first thing that we did. We hired them right away. We actually got a grant from the Department of Labor to keep them on for about 2 years. And during that 2 years, we made about 100 improvements throughout just the baseball hat factory and our embroidery department. I would say of those 100 improvements, probably 95 of them are still there, and we really made a commitment to keeping them there for a while. Baseball caps are a very cookie cutter product. It's the same, even though every day we make 15 totally different hats and they're all custom, they all have the same elements, they all go through the same routing process. So it was very easy to put lean principles in place there. Take that same principle that we had for embroidery thread and do it for plastic straps, or do it for fabric. It's really easy because we don't have to move the factory around, and everything kind of stays in one place. But some of the biggest gains cost us no money to put in place, and were real easy to figure out, and were real easy to put in place. For example, probably the biggest amount of time was just spent looking for things, and that's because the place was such a mess. Familiar with 5S at all? Mm-hmm. So we went through our 5S, and we ended up getting rid of every table in the factory, every drawer in the factory, put everything up on walls, made everything visible. When we put things on walls, we would do shadow boards. So if someone took a certain die or a pair of scissors off the wall, there would be just a shadow exactly where that was, and they would know exactly where to put it, and they wouldn't put it in the wrong place. We then made a small investment in tools for every single worker, and drilled holes in their sewing machine tables for things like scissors and tweezers, screwdrivers, and things that they would spend a lot of time looking for. Probably an average of 20 to 30 minutes a day was spent looking for tools. And workers would hoard them because our old plant manager would charge them if they lost something. So the result of hoarding is we would spend way more in labor than we would have lost in theft, people looking for things. We got rid of all of the marginal junk in the factory. That's only about 45,000 square feet of space. And when I walked out on the factory floor, I could see about that far. I could see that wall. There were shelves everywhere. When we got rid of all of the shelves and everything, I could see clear across the floor, and then you could visually see products flow through the factory, and that uncovered a lot of other production problems that we didn't realize that we had. It's amazing how people become blind to things that they're just used to working with every day. I remember when we were doing the 5S, I had an operator that had a kind of a bulky lamp on her sewing table. I was sitting in front of her, and she would do her sewing, and the sewing would build up in a pile over here, and then she'd have to pick it up, kind of move it around the lamp, and drop it in a bin in front of her. Every 10 minutes, she would have to stop what she was doing and push it around, and I asked her, "Do you ever actually use that lamp?" And she looked at me. I'm saying right here, she said, "What lamp?" True story. We moved sewing machines closer together so that the work wouldn't have to be carried between the machines. Managers in the garment industry, and probably most other manufacturing industries, traditionally managed by batching. So it's the theory that workers should fill a bin with work before pushing it on to the next operation. And eliminating batching was definitely gave us the biggest gains in our productivity. Even though it's very difficult for me to understand why or to explain to other people, single unit processing will get you the most bang for the buck in the lean transformation. One advantage was we were able to get orders out in 3 days instead of 3 weeks. When an order was at the end of the production line, if there was a problem with it, we could see those problems. Well, we could stop those problems before the rest of the order was completed. But however, with batching, it was probably the most traumatic experience, when we got rid of the batching, the most traumatic experience of a lean transformation. So the first thing that happens, and we did our 5S and we did a lot of things, and people were like lean, and then we said, okay, we're getting rid of all the bins now. So instead of a big pile of work behind you, you're just going to get one piece from the person behind you. Isn't that great? And I'm like, I don't know about that. So first week of getting rid of batching, everyone started to really slow down their production. We didn't realize this. It was pretty clear pretty soon that everyone was afraid we didn't have any work, because they were used to having a huge pile of work behind them. And where they came from, which was our old jobs that came before us, most of them hadn't been working for us for that long, or the plant manager. We didn't have work. That meant you got laid off. So we started with a few things. We started with a written policy to everyone that we will not lay anybody off due to lack of work, period. That kind of worked. And then we started taking our production schedule. We made a huge sign. We have 32,000 whatever hats to make in work in process right now, and that kind of got the point across. Even we got rid of so much work that even though they tried to slow down, they were only slowing down. They couldn't slow down that much. They could only slow down their cycle time. They were still way more productive than they had been before. The bigger, more traumatic thing was our plant manager's management style was batching. It's really easy to manage by batching. You just take a big box of something, do this, and come and get me when you're done, which could be a day and a half from now. So his management style was to give everybody a bin, sit in his office. He was also doing the purchasing at the time. He was busy. And at any given time, there would be 3 people sitting in his office waiting for him to get off the phone. This was constant. There probably would be more, but he only had 3 chairs. So he hated the fact that we got rid of batching because it meant he had to do planning, he had to move around, and he gave me an ultimatum. He said, either I'm going to go, or you have to get rid of lean, or I'm going to go. And we decided that we were going to stay with the lean. And he made good on his threat, and he left. Pretty good terms, but he didn't want to do this job. He wanted to batch somewhere else, which is what he ended up doing. But one thing that happened, we realized as soon as he left, it was like we gained 4 free full-time employees, the people that were sitting in his office. All of a sudden we're working. Our productivity jumped up just from that. So we still continually improve all of our processes. You have to, because once you improve one process, something else becomes the bottleneck. Once you improve your productivity, then all of a sudden you're not selling fast enough. And then when you start selling faster, your office and your administration becomes a bottleneck. And then when you get all that figured out, you can't make the stuff fast enough again. So it's just constantly going through and improving productivity in every department. We've learned a lot of lessons from that made the transformation easier. So one is that the top management has to be involved. Maybe not to the extent that I was and have been, but if top management is not involved, what ends up happening is people are afraid to make decisions. An example would be machinery that I can say it's okay to throw away. No one's ever going to throw away machinery unless I'm sitting there with every single piece saying it. No one's going to restructure a department. No one's going to change a layout. And there's a lot of obsolete parts that people are afraid to go. They just put it in a box somewhere and it goes under a table, and then when you move, you end up throwing it away then. Management has to be involved to make sure that that stuff happens in real time. The other thing is you have to share the productivity gains in order for people to really buy into it. So we had a few things. We had bonuses. Those bonuses became raises. Those raises became, if you finish all of this, when you finish all this on Friday, you can leave, sort of things. But we've always been keen on sharing those productivity gains, and that's when you get your best ideas from the people on the factory floor. Once a critical mass of workers really buy into lean, that's when it really kind of takes off. And the workers inevitably will love it. It's a cleaner work environment. They're less fatigued. And we, after about 4 years, we ended up doing lean training in very small groups and spending a lot of time doing that. We weren't sure how much the factory workers would understand about it. We found a training video from a consultant up in Massachusetts that basically it was in Spanish, most of our workers speak Spanish, and it showed our employees that how most people naturally use the principles of lean manufacturing in their kitchen. But when they go to work, they throw it all out the window. It's called lean toast. I highly recommend it. When you're in the kitchen, your dishwasher is next to the sink and your cabinet's up here, and you take stuff out of the dishwasher and you put it in the cabinet and you know where everything is and it's all at arm's length. And then you go to work and you do one step over here and you carry one piece all the way across the floor and you do it over there, and then you spend 15 minutes looking for something. And they got it, and that really, really helped out after that. So 2008, we bought this bag factory, 2008. It had gone out of business. It was in foreclosure. We basically bought their assets and took most of their employees over to Newark. They were in East Newark. And now we had the challenge of figuring out how to apply lean into a custom product situation. It was very easy with hats because it's the same line. And here we are, one day we're making backpacks, and the next day we're making safety vests. And there are days where we're making backpacks and safety vests and tote bags and yarmulkes and all these different things in one little team. And we had to figure out how to make that work. So we have a lean production team that meets twice a week and discusses production planning, production problems. We ended up hiring an engineer out of NJIT who does our value stream maps for every single product. We do a value stream map, and then we determine whether we can fit it into kind of a basic team of sewing machines, or whether we should take sewing machines and restructure them and make a production line that we might only use for 3 or 4 days. We almost always determine that it's faster to just move the machines around. I mean, calculus is you stop working for 90 minutes and move these machines, and what ends up happening is an order that would take 5 days now takes 3.5 days because you did that. You always end up ahead when you take the time to do it. We've also taken more space, and we found that it's worthwhile to have dedicated production lines for products that we make only intermittently. So when we would make safety vests, we'd get a pretty big order, but then we wouldn't make them again for 6 months. But when we would make them, there'd always be a very long learning curve, and we'd have to figure out how to set these production lines up again. And we said, you know what, let's just leave a line in place. The rent is going to be cheaper than paying for that learning curve and then suffering through that non-value added time every time that we start a new safety vest order. We've done that with a bunch of different products. Since then, we figured out that the better way to do it, less expensive way to do it, was to map every production line that we set up. So, because we didn't want to keep taking more space, so we now keep track of the production line at the end of the order, because it's very different. We go into an order thinking we want to set this production line up this way, and then we'll come back 2 days later, and the workers who are all really into lean will change their desks or tables so it'll be this way, because this one's left-handed. And we based it on the fact that someone might be right-handed, or this bin is too small for this because the bags will fall out onto the floor. So at the end of the line, we take snapshots of everything, we make a grid on it, and then when we're ready to get that order again, we will put it into place. So we now have a company-wide policy of adding value. We try to go for 5 hours a day of adding value. That's our minimum. We're usually hitting about 6 hours a day of adding value, and we use the term hours per day because that's something that our workers all understand. They didn't necessarily understand percentages. We actually, through MEP, we got a math training grant that came in, and we found out most of our workers were around second grade level for math. They were worse in math and English, and these are people who spoke very little English. But they understood the hours per day, and they also understood that adding value for 5 or 6 hours a day and getting paid for 8 was a great deal. So we calculate this by, when we do our value stream at the beginning, we do a time study, we figure out what the best case scenario is for manufacturing, and then we compare that to the hours actually worked, and every week we go by department and we determine how the average number of hours per week, hours per day that people were working. And that seems to get the message across. So another thing that's happened is by really stressing, and we're a small business, and we didn't have an engineer until last year, and we have found that by focusing on the value stream maps, we were then able to re-engineer products that we didn't think that we could do before. We would make a messenger bag, and that's the way that messenger bag was made. And a lot of our business is clients who are getting products made overseas, and kind of a ironic twist, they're taking their overseas products and sending it to us and asking us to knock them off. Because they want the products made in America, and in a lot of instances and a lot of products, it's actually less expensive to make the products domestically. An example would be a product that's got very expensive fabric, like a leather handbag. A lot of those are made in USA or in places that have more expensive labor than the USA, like Italy, because the leather is going to cost the same here. It's just going to cost a little more here than it is in China, but it might be $40 in leather here and $6 in labor versus $40 in leather in China and $2 in labor. Well, at the end of the day, it's $46 versus $42. You're going to end up paying more than that when you throw the shipping and duties and everything on there. So we're seeing a lot of that coming back. We're seeing big bulky products coming back, a lot of laptop bags that have a lot of foam in it. And when we get these products, we're noticing that there is so much unnecessary labor in a lot of these products that are made overseas. A lot of it is a vestige from maybe not that long ago, 6 or 8 years ago, where labor in China was basically free. It's not like there was unemployment insurance there. They had to make work for all the people who worked in the factory. And so they would have people trimming in between a lining and the outside of a bag, something that no one would ever see. Or just doing a lot of unnecessary stitching. We saw a lot of bags that would come in where the bottom of the bag would have a seam in it, which just makes absolutely no sense. Why would you put a seam in the bottom of the bag? It's going to rip. The only reason it would make sense is they just wanted to throw some extra labor on there. So the first thing that we do when we get one of these reshoring jobs is we say, well, we can take the product and we can re-engineer it so that it's going to be a better product and it's going to look exactly the same. No one's going to notice it. And the difference is if we make it the way that you want us to make it, it's going to be $85. If we make it the way that we want to make it, it's going to be $15. It's really that big of a difference.
Wow.
So we're able to do that, and then we're able to really be a lot more competitive without making our work, without having to exploit workers or making work, without trying to compete on labor costs. We're basically competing on engineering. So I'm sure some of you guys have some questions, and I'd love to answer them. Who wants to start?
Can we clap first?
Yes.
Since the lean, your turnover, the hourlies, how's that going now?
The turnover is virtually nil at our place. One of the advantages of being a union shop is the health insurance is very inexpensive for union shops, and it's something that we offer all of our workers, and it's something that most of the other sewing factories, I'm sure actually none of them in the area offer health insurance. So workers will come to work for us because they know we offer health insurance, and once they get it, they don't want to leave. So it has not been a problem. In fact, during that whole lean time, the only turnover problem we had was the plant manager. We ended up, well, you would think that implementing lean would result in fewer workers, but in reality, it lowered our costs and made us more competitive, enabled us to ship products faster, and as a result, we ended up with more business. And with more business, we had more scale, which enabled us to lower our costs even more. And lean was really drove the growth of the business and the growth of the number of employees. So has not been an issue. Yes.
Can you give me an idea of what the competitive landscape is like for making hats or something like that? I mean, who are your competitors?
Well, with hats, we don't compete so much with overseas. It's because a baseball cap has a ton of labor in it and very little material cost. It's almost all labor. We're still probably twice as much as an overseas hat. We used to be about 10 times as much though. But still, there are very few clients who will spend twice as much for a product because it's made in the United States. Bags, on the other hand, we're able to be competitive with. There are 4 other union shops that are out there, so we compete with them for union work. And what unions buy bags? Well, we just did an order of 6,000 backpacks for the Federal Government Employees Union and 4,000 backpacks for the Firefighters Union Convention and those sort of things. There's a larger number of domestic military and homeland security and government contractors that we bid against, and there's really enough business to go around for domestic people. What's happening now, however, is the garment industry is really starting to come back for bags in particular, and because of our location and how close we are to Newark, we're seeing a big number. We met with the Limited. They came out and did a factory tour yesterday. we actually we did work for the Limited 2 years ago, and it was a very interesting experience. They decided 2 years ago they wanted to make 5 to 10% of their products in the United States. When I say it's not really the Limited, it's Victoria's Secret. I think they split up. Mast is the parent company now. So we're doing the pink line, pink tote bags for Victoria's Secret. And they did not have really a plan of how their infrastructure was going to be able to deal with a domestic factory. And we took the order, we were really excited about the business, and we shipped to Columbus, and we had to ship everything to Hong Kong first, because that's where all of their testing facilities were. They did not have any testing facilities domestically who could test for the kinds of toxins that are coming out of China. You can't even we couldn't buy whatever it was, phthalimide or something, free ink domestically, so we couldn't buy a can of ink for screen printing we couldn't prove that the stuff didn't have phthalimides in it. So we had to send everything to Hong Kong first and send it. So they've kind of straightened out and they've gotten their infrastructure in place, and now they're going to start sourcing some things domestically. There are also a lot of organizations that really focus on labor content. An example is the college bookstore market. That's where the Fair Labor Association came out of. That started as a monitoring agency for bookstores to make sure that colleges weren't licensing their logo to companies that had goods produced in sweatshop. That Fair Labor Organization is the same organization that Apple hired to monitor the iPhone factories, and now Nike has hired to monitor their factories overseas. But the college market, there's a very strong commitment to labor content. So when you go to a college bookstore, you'll see a lot of products that are made domestically, but that don't advertise it anywhere. You know, look really deep inside. It's not like, you don't see a lot of college students rushing out to buy something because it's union made. But in reality, a lot of those products in the bookstores are actually union made in the United States because the standards that they have for labor are so strict. And then because of the difference, because of the premium is shrinking for domestic products, you're seeing different types of organizations really buy domestically now because it's not as expensive for them to be consistent. So you'll see, basically manufacturers would be the first one, GM and Ford, and food processing companies like Budweiser. They're buying a lot of products that have their logos on it in the United States because they're using Made in USA in their advertising. They don't want stuff out in the marketplace that says Made in China on it. But then you also have organizations like NPR or Greenpeace that are buying products made in USA so that they can avoid any potential conflict with sweatshops or any connotations that their goods are made in, you know, a place where the pollution is rampant and they have to ship it across the world to get it here. So, in a long-winded answer to your question, it's becoming a lot easier for us to compete because there are a lot more clients who are willing to pay our price, and I feel that this is something that's only going kind of in one direction.
What percentage of your goods are for resale? What percentage are just to organizations just to distribute as novelty or whatever?
Well, right now it's probably about 40% government work.
Okay.
Mostly uniforms, and that's mostly bags. We do a lot of hats for Homeland Security, Coast Guard, FEMA, organizations like that, uniform hats. And then of the balance, it's probably about 20% garment industry, which is for resale. And that's really the only resale type of stuff that we do. Most of the licensed goods are not, even a company like Harley Davidson, which has a strong commitment to domestic manufacturing, but they made licensing deals several years ago and they have lost control over the sourcing content of those things. So you'll see if you buy a Harley hat in the store, that'll still say made in China. But GM is not really licensing their logo except through NASCAR, and that stuff is made in China. So we're not doing a lot of licensing business. That's mostly garment industry. And then the balance is mostly promotional work for those kinds of companies and unions.
Where's your location?
We're in Newark. We're right off of Bloomfield Avenue
Okay.
in North Newark.
Okay.
So I'm curious, when you mentioned that now you're at about 6 hours of value-added work a day, and originally you had it at about 2 hours of value-added work a day. Both the union employees and the union as a whole, what was their reaction when you started turning up the level a little bit?
They wanted to make sure that they were included in the games, but in the backdrop of all this, there went from being maybe 24 union shops in these areas to one, we only had a factory left, and 4, and during that time, our union was going through a lot of changes, and they just said, you know what, whatever you guys need to do to stay in business, go ahead and do it. The workers are really happy there, and they saw we were increasing employment, not decreasing employment, so it was a non-issue with the union. In fact, I was even surprised to find out that unions in general had problems with lean manufacturing. I found out I was attending a labor conference, and apparently it was a big issue in China that these labor activists were fighting against lean manufacturing, and that's because they weren't sharing the gains with the workers. You know, they're just trying to come up with ways to get more product out of the same number of people. And lean does not work in a top-down environment at all. It only works when people cooperate. You can't kind of force somebody to work smarter. You can only force somebody to work harder.
For a short period of time.
Yeah.
You said you had gotten a lot of gains when you got rid of the batching and went to a continuous flow environment. I'm kind of curious, did you run into problems where the person, at the beginning of the line, maybe not as fast or faster than the next person in line? Did you run into those problems? And if so, how do you deal with it?
All the time. And the way that we balance our teams is we do a value stream map, and we determine maybe this is a 30-second job, and this is a 60-second job, and this is a 90-second job. We look for the job that takes the longest. It's the limiting factor. So in a baseball hat, it takes about 1.5 minutes to sew the visor on perfectly straight, and that's the limiting factor in baseball hats. So it takes 1.5 minutes. So then we say, okay, we want to give everybody else here 1.5 minutes worth of work, which might mean taking another 90-second job or combining a 60-second job and a 30-second job in place. And when you do that, you can actually get rid of batching. But it never works that way in principle. So with your experience, you figure out what kind of buffer do I want between jobs. Where do we add a second machine? So when you might have absentee problems, will screw this up more than anything. So you've got to have people cross-trained to move to that second machine when there's a problem. But we do tend to put the slowest and most unpredictable people at the beginning and the end of the line, because that's where you can make up your biggest mistakes. You can, if someone is slow or new, you can put an extra person at the beginning of the line a lot more easily than you can put them in the middle of the line. And at the end, you can always take people from the beginning of the production line and move them to the end if you see things are backing up there. What you don't want to happen, and what happens in human nature, is when there is a backup in production, you notice everybody behind them starts to slow down. And one of the reasons for that is my shortcut for kind of determining what is imbalanced in the factory. I walk around and I say, in this particular job, if I see 2 people standing up and moving around, I know there's a problem. Just like I'm not paying people to walk around. We wanted to take the time to put these machines in the right place. We did something wrong. We did something wrong. The workers didn't do anything wrong. Or if I see work in process. If I see a big pile of work in process, the machine is down, somebody didn't show up for work, or we planned this wrong, or we estimated wrong. So, people would get used to being looking for piles. So in order to stay out of trouble, they would slow down, not create the piles. That's why I say that continuous improvement is just a constant struggle against human nature. Good. Anything else? All right. Thank you.